so much for those profound words that really resonate with the theme of today. Next, Glen, Weyl, the Microsoft Research founder and chair of Plurality Institute, will speak with us about why Silicon Valley needs to get religion.
Thank you so much. Can I turn the slide here? So this is based on joint work with Nina Lutz, who's so Nina is I don't have a slide changer, so I'll just speak here. I hope can everyone hear me? Yes. Okay, wonderful. So Nina is a graduate student at the University of Washington. She was my, thank you. She was my intern this summer. And this work is really inspired by my own personal experience. So I grew up in Silicon Valley in a neo-atheist family. I've been involved at the intersection of technology and politics since the age of 7 when I was on television talking about it. And the Silicon Valley world that I grew up in, my family, was incredibly hostile to religion. It was sort of relentlessly dismissive of religious people and religious communities. And this is reflected all over the place in shows like Silicon Valley. They have a famous show about the closeted Christians. And the heroes that we were brought up with, people like Isaac Asimov, Ayn Rand, etc., all had a sort of fiercely hostile attitude towards religion. And you also see it reflected in all kinds of practices. So for example, companies throughout the tech industry have DEI initiatives. They systematically survey on a range of characteristics to ensure balance. And yet, to my knowledge, none of them has considered the representation of religion and religious observance in any of these. And almost every one of these reports said it's an interesting area for future research. And the thing that really struck me as I began to work more with Taiwan and with Asia is how different it is in Asia. And this is actually quantitatively reflected in this wonderful book by Elaine Eklund and her colleagues, where she finds that in Taiwan, Japan, India, this is totally different. So rather than this separation and hostility between technology and science on the one hand and religion on the other hand, there's actually a feeling of collaboration. And in fact, people who are involved in those industries are actually more religiously observant than the rest of society on average. You see this reflected in all kinds of practices. In Taiwan, the core to the semiconductor success that they've had has actually been the spirituality and dedication and precision that people bring to their craft. In the Middle East even, the Museum of the Future in Dubai famously is covered in writing from the Quran. In Japan, in the Museum of the Future in Tokyo, you see the spirit of Shintoism, the animist notion, the notion of there being a spirit in everything, reflected in technology. Maybe more than anywhere in India, actually, according to The Economist, the majority of all the money going into the tech sector in startups is going into faith tech. Imagine that. Totally different atmosphere than in the West. And technology is being used to allow people to have embodied religious experiences, to transport themselves and surround themselves in spiritual realities, in religious observances, etc. And of course, Gurudev is an amazing example of a religious leader bringing technology deeply into the way that they transmit and invite people into their practices. I think it's critical that we learn from that experience because religion has so many critical things to bring to the technology industry. And I'll just give 3 examples. First, at the level of philosophy, the default attitude that dominates the technology industry comes from sort of economics and reductionist thinking, where everyone is an individual and then there's some grand social planner. And we see this reflected in AI, where there's a sort of centralizing tendency or an individuating tendency, and far too little consideration of community and social organization, the diversity of social groups that make us who we are, and as a result has really been tearing apart a lot of the social fabric that is so critical to our societies. This is a natural result of the simplistic ways in which we imagine science in the West. Of course, complexity science and other frames can help us avoid that, but it's very counterintuitive for people. You put it in a religious frame and that goes away. Hinduism, for example, gives us an incredibly powerful way to see diversity and unity in diversity. And that's the kind of intuition that we need to be brought to the design of our technologies, and that I think that approaches like plurality that I've worked on and AIWS are trying to help us see. And by bringing in the religious understandings, the religious metaphors, we can help people get past the simplistic scientific ways of thinking about things. I also believe that in politics, the politics around technology, religion is absolutely critical. We've seen this sort of extreme focus on accelerationism, on sort of AI development at all costs, on sort of national competition, which really undermines our ability to get to shared ethical understandings, to the normative understandings that are actually necessary for the technology to work at all. Because if it's not integrated into our social systems, if we're in a constant hype versus backlash mode, we will never build the productivity and the deep integration we need for these tools. And we've seen the role that religion has been able to play in that regard in biotechnology. It was critical to how we thought about cloning, how we thought about human embryos, etc. And we need something similar in the way we approach the politics of digital technology. And we're increasingly seeing that in the United States. The politics around AI use and the boundaries are increasingly driven by the participation of religious communities. And I think that if we want a sustainable development of technology, we need to welcome that in and make religious communities critical to the way we approach the regulation of AI. Finally, if we think about geopolitics, we often hear about the standard conflicts between China and the West. And we've fought those on the issue of democracy and surveillance, or on, trade spheres. But neither of those really speak to most of the people in the developing world. Those are not necessarily the terms in which they conceptualize their politics, and they don't want to be part of one camp or the other. But if instead we focus on the question of religious liberty, religious freedom, and religious empowerment in technologies, it's a much more resonant thing for people in Africa, for people in Latin America, for people in the Middle East. But unfortunately, at present, our technologies are not succeeding in providing that. In fact, when you do tests of the fidelity and empowerment of people to convey their faith values to their children, actually the Chinese models, like DeepSeek, are actually currently outperforming the leading models coming out of Silicon Valley, because there hasn't been that focus on including religious communities. So I think we really have to get past that and make it a core tenet of how we compete geopolitically. And that's why I think it's so critical that India, Bharat, Hinduism, and Gurudev become global symbols and leaders. Bharat has done incredible work on integrating the civil sector into the development of technology, not just about government, not just about private sector, but through things like India Stack and AI for Bharat, has really spread throughout the society the power of having the public sector invest, but actually civil sector manage the integration of technology. And I believe that's possible because there is cooperation between the third sector, which is really led by religious institutions, and technology in that society. And I really hope that we can look to Gurudev and to other leaders from India to step into a role of really teaching us in the West how we can have that collaboration between religion and technology, bring it into the technology technology development and into the process of technology diffusion. Thank you so much, and I look forward to your partnership.